Time to admit the truth. Rocky 5 ain't as bad as you make it out to be. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Rocky Review Series, and now we are at the oh-so-beloved chapter of Rocky 5. Obviously, now that we are at the 5th chapter, the first 4 chapters have already been put onto YouTube. If you have not checked them out already, the playlist is there. Go check them out, please, especially my review of Part 4. I talk about the director's cut versus the theatrical cut. Very proud of that video. And now we're talking about the one that I've been probably the most anxious to talk about. Not necessarily the most excited, but the most anxious, because I'm going to cause a little controversy in the comments section with a few of my statements. Rocky 5 was released in 1990, the year that I was born, and so basically my entire childhood, damn near all the way up to adulthood, there was 2 general rules in life that I had gathered from just listening to anybody. And that is, Rocky the movie series is awesome, and Rocky 5 is the worst of that series. After the bombastic tone of Rocky 3 and especially Rocky 4, Sylvester Stallone wanted to get it back to the more grounded, street-level, dramatic tone of the first couple of films, and he even wrote the screenplay but got the original director of the first film, John G. Avildsen, to come back to try as best as he could to recapture the tone and some of the magic of that original film. Unfortunately, all he really accomplished was leaving an extremely bad taste in the mouth of the fan base with the very dark direction that this movie takes in the first few minutes, with Rocky basically losing everything that he built and everything that he earned in the first 4 films, and almost manufacturing the tone of the first film rather than naturally getting to that point in the later part of his story. And for nearly 16 years, this was what everybody saw as the end of Rocky. This was the final chapter, this was the note that we left our hero on, and there was not really any real good signs that it was going to be coming back, because not only was the Rocky movies dead after the critical reception, especially box office, of Rocky 5, but Sylvester Stallone's career really took a nosedive in the early 90s, with him trying to do more of a comedic thing, trying to catch up with Arnold Schwarzenegger's success with Twins and Kindergarten Cop, and Sylvester Stallone gives you
Stop! I'm on mobile, shoot!
And with the exception of a few gems like Cliffhanger and the highly underrated Copland, all the way through to the mid-2000s, Stallone was kind of irrelevant. He didn't really have a whole lot going on as far as mainstream movies. You saw him a little bit here and there in some straight-to-VOD stuff. All signs pointed to that guy's career pretty much having all of his best days behind him. And then in 2016, we got the triumphant return of Rocky and Rocky Balboa. And I am not going to be discussing that film on this video. That is the next one. But very important detail for my argument towards this film is that I think the existence of Rocky Balboa and even the Creed films retroactively make Rocky 5 a much better experience. As the definitive ending, as that being the last Rocky movie, yeah, that's a rough spot to end. But as just a little rough stepping stone to get to where we got in Balboa and the Creed films, I think it's pretty decent. So starting off with the positives regarding Rocky 5, I do really like the choice to bring Rocky back down to his street level, bring him back down to his roots, and try to recapture some of the tone of those first 2 films. Now, the way that he did it, we'll talk about a little bit later, but as far as that stylistic choice, as far as that narrative choice, I do think it was necessary. You're not going to get any bigger or badder than Rocky 4. You're not going to get any sillier, certainly without it turning into a straight-up comedy. And so this was really the only natural way to go. With the way that Rocky 5 set things up, with Apollo Creed being killed, and with Drago being the biggest, baddest opponent that he is ever going to go against, and even some little hints in there that it's probably going to be a life-threatening fight, the aftermath of that being kind of the focus here, it makes sense. Again, it's a little dark, it's a little bit too gritty, I think, but at the same time, boxing has a lot of very real-world health issues, and so the fact that Stallone decided to focus on that after 2 movies of just being all popcorn and fun, starting to dive into the actual realism of the aftermath of fights like that and the toll that it takes on fighters and brain damage, and opening up conversations about that, I do think that it makes sense, and I think that it was a good direction to go. Whether or not they executed it the best, we can debate, but it was a good idea. I also like where things go between Rocky and Adrian, to where Adrian is more than willing to give up the big houses and the fancy cars and the wealth and the butlers as long as she has her husband. She does not want him to threaten his life or lose his life trying to keep all of this stuff, because it can all be replaced. I mean, that goes back to a line in Rocky 3 where it's like, what do we have that can't be replaced? They kind of really hammered that home here, to where they go all the way back to their roots. They go all the way back to the streets of the first film, almost as if they have earned nothing. And she's totally content with it. She's the last person to complain. I mean, I'm sure she'd probably rather have all that stuff, but as long as she has her family, that is all that matters to her. And I like the way that that kind of penetrates its way into Rocky a little bit throughout the movie, to where as a man, as the father, as the husband, he feels inept because of the things that have happened. He feels like he has not lived up to whatever he is supposed to do to take care of his family, to give his family a better life, especially his son. And throughout the movie, he has these conversations with Adrian to where she's trying to get him to understand that it's okay. Like, it's fine. Like, we've been through all of this. It wasn't all for nothing. It's just we got to build ourselves back up now. I also really enjoyed Rocky taking kind of the Mickey role in this one, to where Mickey's gym is basically his only asset. That's the reason why he goes back to the streets of Philadelphia, starts to train a bunch of younger boxers. Obviously, one of the main storylines in this film is the character of Tommy Gunn, who comes in, who is the new heavyweight contender. And Rocky being his mentor, being a father figure, being his trainer, I really liked that angle. A little bit of a precursor to where things are much better executed in the first two Creed films, but I like Rocky being in that mentor role, and I think that after the gigantic stakes of Rocky IV, that was a natural place to bring that character. Something that might be a little controversial, I actually enjoy the relationship that he has with his son. Now, there was a lot of negative criticism, a lot of attacking full on from the critics and from people about Sylvester Stallone casting his actual son as his son in this film. And I don't think the kid's that bad of an actor. I really don't. I mean, he's fine. He's not anything to write home about, but he's not terrible. So whatever bad treatment he got, whatever bad treatment Stallone got, I think is absolutely ridiculous. But the storyline and the dynamic between those two characters that we get here, while definitely being maybe a little bit melodramatic at times, I do think is a good little story to have with him and his son. They just kind of hinted at his relationship with his son in Rocky IV, and depending on what cut you watch, you get more or less of that. But his role as a father is very important, and his role of just loving his son with his whole heart and wanting his son to have the best life and not have to go through all of the stuff that he does, not have to get beat up for a living. And that kind of carries through here to where now they are on the streets of Philadelphia. Now his son has to learn those things just to be able to survive. And Rocky doesn't quite see that. He doesn't quite get that. And he doesn't really listen to his son when his son's crying out for help. He kind of only hears Tommy Gun. And I think it creates a nice little dynamic there to where there's some turmoil between them and there is a relationship to be mended by the third act. So while it not being perfectly executed, I like the element that that brings. And again, it's something that is brought back up in Rocky Balboa. It's brought back up in Creed 2, his tumultuous relationship with his son. And I like that relationship.
Thanks, Dad. You deserve it. Thank you for being born.
And finally, I love the street fight in this movie. That's something that is very love or hate. I've heard a lot of different opinions on, but again, you're not going to do bigger or better than Rocky IV. You are not going to top that fight, either of those fights in that film. And so I think that Stallone made the conscious choice of, let's stop trying to go bigger, let's stop trying to outdo the last film, and let's just do something very different. And so you have a street fight rather than a boxing match, and I like that whole street level element to it. I like that there's the crowd there. I like that it's bloodier and it's a little bit more dirty, and there's higher stakes there because of the diagnosis that Rocky had about if you get into the ring again, you're probably going to have brain damage, and going just bare fists is more dangerous than a boxing glove. And so I think that the final fight with him and Tommy Gunn in the streets and him going down to the ground and having the flashback of Mickey, there's a work print version where Mickey's actually watching the fight and yelling down at Rocky that I would prefer to see that version. But even the one that we get where he just hears Mickey and stands back up for one more round so he can knock the fuck out of that cocky little prick, I really dig it. I think it was a really cool direction to go. And actually, the first time that I watched these movies when I was 16, the final fight in Rocky V was my favorite for a little while. And now moving on to the negatives. And look, as much as I say this movie is not as bad as people make it out to be, and it's actually got a lot of things going for it that it does not get enough credit for, it's still pretty clearly the weakest film in this franchise, for sure. And there is just a lot of things that, no matter how much time passes between 1990 and today, no matter how many sequels come out after this that kind of lessen the blow of certain things, there's inherent issues with this film that, unless we get a Stallone director's cut to the likes of Rocky IV, which is rumored to be happening, it's probably always going to be that way. Biggest issue with the film for me is that despite the fact that I actually really like the direction that Stallone was trying to take this film, and I like going back to the street level, and I like going back to the tone and the approach of the first couple of films, the avenue that he took to get there is a very rough pill to swallow. And that was the main reason why this was such a hated entry in this franchise for the longest time before you got to Rocky Balboa and saw him in a much better place in life, is because they take everything away from him. Like, you get to the end of Rocky IV, he's got this ultimate victory, and then they kind of pull an Alien 3 at the beginning of this, to where immediately after that fight, not only does he have brain damage and he's just physically weakened, and the musical tones are like almost horrific at certain times. It's like, whoa, why are we feeling this way with a Rocky film? And then immediately they go home and, oh, turns out that Paulie fucked everybody, and you lose everything. And it also leaves the character of Paulie, yet again, in a position to where he is an absolute stain on the legacy of Rocky and the family of the Balboas. It sucks, because I really want to love his character for as much of a piece of shit he is in the first film. The little slight journey that he has from 1 all the way up to 4, where I feel like by the end of Rocky IV, they've finally made him a human character. They've finally endeared me to him, just for the immediate next chapter, right at the beginning of the movie, to make him the author of all of the misery of the Balboa family yet again. I just don't like the way that they characterize him. Like, why the fuck do they even have this guy around at this point? Like, he lost you millions of dollars, and you just let the motherfucker sleep on the couch. First of all, it's just not that plausible that somebody that is a national hero and a national celebrity like Rocky, somebody that just whooped the ass of Drago on national TV over in Russia, like somebody that just went through all that, would have no avenues to make money aside from another fight. I never bought that whatsoever. I didn't think it was a very plausible direction to go, but even if you're gonna force me to believe that, good lord, like, there was a much easier way to recapture the tone of those first couple of films without absolutely ripping everything away from Rocky. I mean, I think you could have just gone with the retirement phase and him being the Mickey character for a ground level, street level, up-and-comer like himself, and it would have captured a lot of that magic of that first film without having to just completely rip his life from him. And part of the reason why that direction it doesn't quite come across in the best way for Rocky V for me is that I think that there is some serious contention between the tone and the direction that Stallone is going for with his writing and with his vision for the character, and John G. Avildsen's direction.
Don't lay it down. Fight this guy hard. Come on. He's no machine. I didn't hear no bell. Get up, you son of a bitch. Mickey loves you.
Now, John G. Avildsen, since the first Rocky, had gone on to do the Karate Kid trilogy. A lot lighter, a lot more fun, especially get to the third film, a lot goofier, although I love Karate Kid 3. And Stallone clearly with this fifth film is going for something much darker and grittier and meaner than anything that we've seen in the Rocky franchise thus far. And I don't think their directions, their ideas, their visions for this movie lined up very well. Because you get those darker story elements, those grim elements, and then you also get some very silly direction from John G. Avildsen. You get a lot of music videos, stylistic transitions, and it's just very odd. And it just makes the experience of watching Rocky V very jarring. And that is not exemplified better than in the character of George Washington Duke.
Touch me and I'll sue.
Come on, pug. Touch me and I'll sue.
To where you have somebody that is just so off tone from the actual story and tone of the movie, to where they're going for these darker, grittier elements, these more down-to-earth elements, and then you've got the biggest cartoon in this entire franchise walking around. And if I thought that Mr. T was the element that perhaps made Rocky III the poorest aged film in the franchise, George Washington Duke is absolutely the poorest aged element of the entire franchise. Just that one character right there. You pull him out of this movie, the movie is instantly better, and it's an element that just it ages it immediately, because unless you know who the hell Don King is, that character makes no sense and you don't understand what they're going for. And then you also have the character of Tommy Gunn. Now, on paper, I like what they were doing with this character. On paper, you have Rocky that is going back to his roots and doing the whole trainer-mentor thing with an up-and-comer fighter. And the whole movie, by the end of it, is Adrian especially trying to get across to Rocky that not all fighters are made the same. They don't have your heart. You know, it wasn't just because you were hungry and you were a good fighter that you got as high as you did. It's because you had a good heart and you had a lot of the right motivations, to where Tommy Gunn very quickly and easily is twisted and manipulated. And I really like that narratively. Unfortunately, they decided to find a boxer and teach him how to act rather than find an actor and teach him how to box. Mistake.
Man, I ain't you, and you ain't Mick. Man, when are you gonna understand that? When are you gonna understand this is a business? And a business you need...
What, brains?
You said that, not me.
Is that what you're saying? You're saying I got no brains?
Tommy Morrison is easily the weakest performer in this film. He's not horrible. It's not like an embarrassment, but you can tell this guy does not have any acting experience. And you really needed somebody with some chops to be able to really pull that storyline up a lot more than where it actually was on the page. And so he's one of those elements that he gets twisted and turned so quickly that you just immediately lose any slight endearment you might have had to that character. And so he's another element, not nearly as bad as Duke, but another element that just feels like an off element in this film for the direction that they're going. And finally, not a fan of the music in this movie, which sucks because Rocky V is my favorite soundtrack of the franchise, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. Quickly into 1990, they're going for more of a hip-hop flavor, more of that street-level flavor, and there's parts of the movie where that works, but at the same time, it feels foreign.
Yo, Tommy! I didn't hear no bell.
The fact that you don't have more classic Rocky themes throughout this movie, with them trying to go back to the tone and the feel of those first two movies, it feels like a gigantic missing element. And I contend that if Stallone, they're one and the same, if Stallone is actually working right now on a director's cut of Rocky V, I guarantee that's one of the first things he's going to change. So overall, guys, Rocky V to me is another very solid entry in this franchise. I have no problem rewatching this whenever I go back through and do a marathon of these movies. It's still easily the weakest of the franchise, but I don't think it's nearly as horrible as a lot of people make it out to be. Certainly not in hindsight after some later releases. And I am eagerly anticipating some kind of Stallone recut of this, because I think there is a massive room for improvement with just a couple of tweaks to this movie. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for a playlist of all of my Rocky reviews, and I'm gonna put a most recent ranking up here of the franchise as well. Please like and share and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss my review of Rocky Balboa, Creed, and then Creed 3 on Thursday. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.